So I'm Chris Lee. I'm the principal technologist at Transform Labs. I'm also the chief technology officer at Include Health. You can talk to me about either one of those later if you want to. We're running late, so I'm just going to get into it, and I'm going to figure out where I need to stand to not here. Okay, good. All right. And now I can't see my screen, so let's go on. All right, so future programming. This is the third talk in the series, and how many of you here have seen the previous two, or at least one of the previous two? Huh, cool, I got groupies. I like it. All right, so predicting the future is a fool's game. Like, no one can predict the future. But, you know, hey, we're going to try to predict the future here. But in reality, you really can't predict the future. But what you can do is look at the sort of previous period that you're in, and then figure out what the next time frame of that probably same period looks like. So I can look at the last 18 months and sort of look at, like, what is in the next 18 months? What can I tell you what's going to be in 10 years or 5 years? No one can, because we couldn't have predicted where we are now 3 years ago, because it has all changed. All right. So in this overall framework, we sort of talk through a time period. We started at the 1950s. We work up till now. In the future of work talk, we really talked about the recent past being since ChatGPT was released, which was November of 2020, or 21. And that talk focused around the future, or the current sort of thing was ChatGPT and large language models, and that's what was driving us. And then the future that we could sort of guess in that talk was really aimed at AI agents and into large action models. So you can, as Neil pointed out, if you want to hear about those two things, you can catch them on the Tiger Talk site. The second talk was about the future of labor. And really, we talked about in the guessable future, we expanded it a little bit, because labor requires hardware. If I'm going to replace non-digital things with other non-digital things, we really then talked about agentic labor and what does robotics look like, and what are we going to do in manufacturing and some of those kind of things. And that really focused on sort of the human robotics implementation. We talked through some sort of algorithms that get us to smarter robots, less having to hard code robots, and how does programming work. All right. So now you've caught up on the last two, so if you didn't see them, you don't have to go watch those. We're all covered. All right, so this one's about the future of programming. So what are we going to talk about? And I added a slide here, or I added a bar at the bottom, just so we could sort of talk about languages that we have out here. It really started about 1840. I didn't feel like redoing all my timelines, because I'm ultimately lazy, and AI wouldn't do it for me. So we're just gonna say 1840. But about the 1940s, we started getting actual electronic computers, and an assembly language came up. And then throughout time, you sort of see in the 50s and 60s, it was COBOL. In the 70s was C and Pascal. 80s was C++. Then, you know, we get into the Java era and sort of Swift and Rust, and up to where we are now. All right. But in 1840, I do want to call out, the first programmer was Ada Lovelace. So she was a mathematician. She worked with Charles Babbage. He had this physical device, and she figured out how to make the physical device do algorithms. So that's really where this all started from a programming perspective. All right. So when we talk about programming, we're really talking about building things online. All right. But it's a team sport. A programmer by themselves is a useful human currently in the entire cycle of what it means to actually build something online. But programmers by themselves don't build the entire product. We have product managers, we have testers, we have QA, we have DevOps. There's a number of roles that go into actually building a product online. For this particular thing, you know, when we think about someone has an idea and we need to translate that into software, right? Idea to software. There's an Easter egg on the screen if you want to figure out what the Easter egg is. But that process is not straightforward, right? the process of like, hey, I want to do this, and then actually building it and getting it out so people can actually use it is a mercurial kind of thing that happens, right? Okay, lots of pieces. People have conflicting ideas about how things should work, but that team comes together and actually builds it. And the programmer is a component of that team. And I just want to, as we walk into the programming space, just remember when we talk about, hey, I want to build a piece of software, it's not just about the programmer. It's about all the other things that go around that piece of software and actually developing that piece of software. All right. So what is programming now? Apparently you have to have multiple screens if you're a programmer. Right? How many programmers do we have here? Raise it higher. Okay. Okay. So about 25% of you are programmers. Good. All right. So programming to me, people are like, why did you get into programming and how did that work? Programming to me is a very creative thing. I know it seems like it wouldn't be, but it is. It's almost like writing, it's creative writing, in my opinion. When I'm solving a particular problem with software, to me, it's like if I'm writing a short story or story of fiction, like how I actually solve the problem is up to me, how that problem turns out and sort of how it all works. It's a creative thing, but it quickly becomes a very complex creative thing. And that's where we start getting into like the length of time it takes to actually build something. You know, we have terms like technical debt, which talks about like, oh, I built it in the past, now I'm trying to build something else. That stuff I built in the past is terrible, which is everything I built in the past is terrible. Let's just be honest, all right? So, but it is me with a single computer. Typically, programming is sort of an isolated kind of thing. And I had some fun pictures in here that I took out because I didn't want to offend anybody. But basically, it was, you know, the look on a programmer's face when anyone talks to them at any point in time while they're actually writing code. Mm-hmm. Programmers laugh, everyone's else like, what you talking about? All right, so how do you know, if we're saying that, you know, that's what it was, and we look at our last sort of time window, what's in that last time window? Well, in order as a programmer for me to figure out how to write code, I went through an evolution. Back in the day, there's books, and they're like dead trees that we would write words on and then press them and then hand them out to people, and you would have them on a shelf, right? And then you would open that book and then figure out like what you wanted to do. So if I had a particular problem, I needed to know how a particular function would work, some new language was coming out and I needed to learn it. It was a book. We would get books out. And then in 96, we got something called IntelliSense, which was in my editor that I used to write code. It would try to finish the word for me, right? So this is well beyond or well before like ChatGPT and those kind of things. So this is 96. So they were building little machine learning models that would sit into our editors, and they would try to finish my thought. And at first they're very annoying because it's like, that's not what I was typing. And you probably experienced this when you're on your phone and it's auto-completing words that it's like, that's not the word. Think of doing that while you're actually doing work. All right, versus just sending a text message. All right. Then in June of 21, and I would like you to understand that date, June of 21 was long before ChatGPT was out. So June of 21, so Copilot, the thing we used was an evolution of IntelliSense that got smarter. So instead of just finishing words, it would try to go, oh, I think I know the function you're trying to write, and it would try to lay that function out for us. And most of the time you would just like, no, don't do that. And then, but sometimes it was helpful, and sometimes you were able to, in the middle of a piece of code that you're writing, highlight something, and it would go, here's probably what you were trying to do, and it sort of would help you out. It's like, all right. ChatGPT came out. It wasn't very good at code back in the early days. Like, it was not good at that. You could give it code, and it would like not know what to do with code. And then Claude Sonnet, which was June of this year. That's probably your best programmer friend right now. It thinks through it the best outside of like 01 preview. But this was our evolution. And we went from books to IntelliSense to Copilots to ChatGPT to Claude, right? So that's how we learned. So I no longer go back to books because why would I? when I have tools that can like be pretty intelligent about how it's doing it. But what are those current tools? So what does a day in the life of a programmer actually look like? So this is a pretty common tool set, and now some of them are generalizations, but we'll sort of talk through it a little bit. In your top right, you're dealing with some kind of language. Like everyone's like, oh, what languages do you know? What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And then every language sort of comes with a framework. And those frameworks allow you not to have to think about it from scratch. So it's a way for us to sort of shortcut an implementation of a language, start using a language without having to like do it all ourselves. Down the lower right, you're probably dealing with some sort of database. Like we deal with databases all the time. So your code is doing something, it needs to store it somewhere. That's all a database is essentially storage of memory that's going on at any particular time. But in the middle is where we spend most of our time. Most of us, how many are here are VS Code users? The programmers, how many are VS Code users? Oh, I thought it'd be better than that. Okay. All right, so VS Code, we has built in, copilots. So now that's a tool that we use, and this is something we're dealing with daily. We have things called package managers, which allow us to pull in other people's code to include it in our code. Because I don't know if you know this, but programmers actually are just like, they write like glue code that actually just binds everybody else's code together. That's really what we do for a living. I hate to burst the bubble to all of you, but very rarely do we start with nothing and then build something. Normally we're starting with existing code, packages, other libraries that people have written, and we rely on those to go forward. We use most of the time we use some sort of product like Docker, or it allows us to create a container, so that way when I build code and run code, I could just like pick it up and move it onto a server, and it will run over there. And so I can pick up that Docker container and put it on somebody else's machine, and it'll run there. So we don't have to like think too much about our deployments as long as we're using tools like that. There's a whole bunch of tools we use to test our code. And then there's the tools we use to communicate with other humans on the team about the code that we're writing. And these are all in the top, your top right, my top left. So like we use Figma and some sort of like Jira. Figma is a design tool that allows us to sort of do flowcharts, and sometimes designers will use it to tell us what the screen should look like and those kind of things. Jira is our tool that we can communicate like what we're supposed to be doing and how we're doing and is it working or not. And of course GitHub is where we store all of our source code for the most part, and then Slack is how I get interrupted and I forget what I'm writing. All right, and then there's like, where does this stuff run? And I'm just using Azure and Vercel as examples, but if you've been alive, you probably know about Google, you probably know about Amazon, you probably know about Azure. Like, these things are all out there, so these are examples. These are the things I deal with a lot. And then Terraform is like, okay, I need to go deploy this thing. What does my Azure environment or my Google environment look like in order to run this thing that I'm actually building? All right, so now you realize programmers write very little code, but we spend a lot of time in other people's code writing, using tools. That's what we do for a living. Let's be honest, all right? When I get to sit down and actually write code and then like build something from scratch and not have any co-pilots and those kind of things, it takes a long time. And that's why we've built all these tools to help us and make things go faster, all right? So that's this blue that's up here. That's what we use now. That's there. So what's really gonna happen in the next 18 months? All right, let's do it. All right, so what is programming in the AI era? Let's get a couple things straight. This is always good to qualify my conversations. There are well, first of all, everyone knows that language models don't understand things, right? Yes. Yeah, good, all right, good. My favorite line that I sometimes forget is, every time you hear the word AI, I want you in your head to substitute the word math. So if someone goes, oh, our product has AI, great, your product says math, because that's all AI is. It's just complex math. And in fact, it's not even super complex. You probably learned the majority of it in high school. You didn't realize it at the time that that was going to turn into AI. You know, if you look at things like matrix math and some vector stuff, you probably had that in high school or early college. That is what we've built almost all of this on top of. So from now on, when you hear the word AI, you're going to replace it with? Right, all right, from now on, it's ruined for you. Anytime you see it on a commercial, you're gonna be like, oh, it's math, all right? But language models understand patterns. They don't actually understand what they're saying, right? So there are things that pattern recognition is good at. Like it can recognize syntax and semantics. It can generate code because code is a pattern. And it can actually debug and suggest improvements in code because that's pattern recognition. It knows bad code because it has seen enough code that it knows what good code is. And it can recognize that your code is either super creative or terrible, right? And I like to think mine's super creative, but a lot of times it'll correct me anyway. All right. But there are things that it's not good at, things that language models don't do inherently. And one of them is execution and testing. Like it doesn't execute for correctness, it executes so it doesn't have a syntax error. It just executes so it'll compile. It doesn't actually know what it's writing. It just knows it's no longer creating a problem. And that's what its goal is, right? It doesn't understand its contextual purpose. Like, what am I building this piece of software for? It understands the function and the parameters of the function because it's a pattern. But what it doesn't understand is, why is this function being written? Why are you doing what you're doing right now? But it will slam out code pretty quick. Is it slamming out good code? Well, it doesn't understand why it's writing the code it's writing. It just writes that code, right? And then conceptual reasoning, it doesn't understand, conceptual purposes, goals, like why is it, or the gist of why you're actually doing that. And then conceptual reasoning is the why. Like, is it safe? Is it able to be hacked? Is it, if it's outside the pattern that it recognizes, it doesn't get why the code that it just generated is there. All right, so let's talk about new tools. We're talking about what's in the next 18 months. So that previous slide that we had up there, which was our what programmers use now, these are the tools the programmers are moving into. And these are the tools that allow us to work with generative AI beyond a copilot, beyond something that's trying to finish a sentence for us or write a function that we don't want. All right. So let's go, when we talk about new frameworks that are coming out, there's LangChain and DSPy, and those are, if we think about those frameworks that allow us to start with something without having to write all the code, these are the AI frameworks that we can use to start with something that someone else has already built that understands what we're trying to accomplish and then allows us to write code faster. Databases have changed. The very traditional sort of SQL databases, that you have are still there. We still need them because those are transactional databases. Those aren't going to go away. But we have new databases that understand that new type of storage that AI understands. Those are vector databases. Those are things that understand sort of that complex math that we're doing and the best way to store that data in order for us to do that complex math. In the middle, where we spend all of our time, I still use VS Code because most of these things plug into VS Code. All right? So if you're not using VS Code and you are a programmer, you should look. All right, but there's all these new tools like Aider and Claude Dev, which just changed its name to Klein. It happened yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't update my slide deck. Had I updated it, you might not know what I was talking about if you didn't know that they changed their name. I'll fix it as we go forward, don't worry. O1 Engineer, Pythagorean, SuperMaven, these are all tools that are better than Copilot. These are tools that we can use that instead of us writing code and it finishes our thought, which is annoying. I mean, let's think about it. If a human finishes your sentence, do you get irritated with that person? You do. All right. So instead of that, we now have code that I could just go, hey, what am I thinking? And it will tell me, like my wife. She will tell me what I'm thinking. All right. No, I'm just kidding. She's great. But this is what these tools now do. So instead of me writing every line of code, I can now prompt for the thing that I want, the feature that I want, and it knows how to generate code, and it knows how to actually put some of that kind of stuff together for us. Pieces, which I'll call out as a special thing, and I know MJ in the back is always like, you should do it, and but now I've become a believer because what I've realized is these tools at the top generate code for me. This tool at the bottom tells me all the code that has been generated and how good or bad it is, and allows me to talk about the code that somebody else wrote. Right? It's a very useful product. All right, I'll give you that. And then on the right side, we have new frameworks that are coming out, or new development tools like V0 and Cursor, and then there's open source versions of those like Zed and Fast Builder and Pear. And what those do is some of them plug into VS Code, but some of them are complete replacements of our current editors. So instead of allowing me to write code, some of these just assume I'm never going to write code. And they will start producing things for us. And that's going to start being sort of the next kind of thing. So, all right, then we have local versus cloud. So everything I just had up there predominantly is something that I would install on my local machine, work with on my local machine, and then if you wanted to work with it, you would have to install those on your local machine and sort of like keep the versions up, those kind of things, and how terrible is that? So there's a new set of products that are coming online that are in the cloud. I don't need to install Visual Studio. I don't need to have a particular machine. Like I've got a beefy laptop to do machine learning, but I can actually do almost all of that in the cloud now without having to install and do any of that myself. So it even breaks us away from having physical implementation of our software on our physical device, right? So these three are really sort of out there. Bolt.new is new. It's going to be a problem when they're not new. But anyway, Replit is a product, and we're going to go through Bolt and Replit a little bit, and then Google has Project IDX, which is, Google's been pushing hard, and just never feel that Google, as big as it is, just isn't hitting it on the AI space like some of the other ones are. Project IDX is very similar to that. Sure, it's got a sort of a chat interface, but it's just not there yet. So let's go through these other two real quick. So let's see what it's like to use these new tools. All right. How many of you have used ChatGPT? Oh, thank God. Okay. So you know probably that you do not go to ChatGPT when you have like a thing that really is sort of complex and ask it a single sentence like, make me a marketing program, go, right? Because you have no idea what you're going to get. You need to prompt engineer, which I hate that term, but you need to sort of manage what you're actually giving it. Well, in the developer world, you want to do more than just a single sentence or even a paragraph. So what we have learned to do, the developers, is I will write an entire document that may be 4 or 5 pages of exactly what I want and what I want to have happen. So for this example, I decided, hey, I'm going to be doing a lot of traveling. I would like a City Explorer app. Are they online? Probably. Do I care? No, because I'm going to build my own because that's how I am. All right. So I want to give it an objective. I want to create a client-side web application. I want to enter a location and a date range. I want to find out events, attraction, hotels, food options during that time frame. And then I want to view any significant locations of interest on a map. So like if like, oh, you should definitely go see the Alamo, right? Even though nothing's going on, those kind of things. I also gave it like the technologies I wanted to use, the main features of the app, the project structure, notes and consideration about security and like what tool, sort of implementation details and some of those kind of things. And this ended up, well, I mean, let's be honest, ChatGPT 01 Preview wrote this document for me after I had a conversation with it. So it gave me the document. I took the document from one AI and then I fed it into these other AIs. All right, let's see how that goes. Bolt. So I fed this big prompt, essentially, into this product, and it goes, hey, and I said, can you build this? And it said, certainly I can build this. And so it started going down and says, now that we have the template, it actually built the entire application for me. So it's beyond just a framework that we're using, where I have to like go implement the framework and then I fill out the framework with all the things that I want to have. This actually read my document and was like, I know you're doing hotels, I know you're doing events, and actually wrote all the interfaces and documents for that. All right. It told me what it was doing. It created my, this won't mean anything to anyone who's not a programmer, but it created all my dependencies, all those libraries that I would want to pull in. Like I didn't have to know what those were. It figured out what I probably needed to do this. It wrote all my package documentation. It wrote all the documentation I would need in order to check that into GitHub, because that was part of my prompt. So it was doing all this work for me. It just generated, like I went go and it went, there you go. Told me what it was doing, told me it should be runnable on my local machine. It actually has its own environment, so this isn't actually even running on my machine. This is running out in the cloud somewhere. Right? And then it ran into some errors, as software does. And then it apologized for creating the errors. And then it fixed the errors. And then told me what it did to fix the errors. And then it gave me some commands of things I had to do, that it created this local file. I needed to update these keys for it to work. Like it was smart enough to realize, oh, you asked me to use a particular API on the internet. You need to tell me how to talk to that API. I'd like, no, but you need to at least give me your keys of access to talk to the API on your behalf, because that's how security works on the internet, right? So went through that. It ran into some other errors. It apologized again, and then fixed those errors. And then ran into some other errors, and then apologized again and fixed those errors. And then I ran out of all my tokens. So I'm not sure if it works or not. This is modern programming. So how much would it cost me to keep going, right? So I'm on the $0 a month plan, which is good for me. But I could do it on the $9 a month plan or the $29 a month plan, or of course, if I want to spend a lot of money, I can chat with the salesperson, right? So I started thinking about, okay, well, this took me 15 minutes, and I burned 150,000 tokens, right? Just if you think of tokens as the fuel of AI, right? I mean, you suddenly will become interested in tokens. But this is going to give me 10,000 tokens a month. So if I do the math, that's 16 hours and 40 minutes worth of work that this tool would do for $9 a month. All right. Let's mentally cache that and come back to it. We'll put a pin in it. All right. So now we're going to go, okay, Replit, let's do the exact same thing. Took the exact same document, and we took it into Replit, and we said, okay, here's my document. You can see me dropping it in there. And it said, absolutely. And then it read the document and goes, well, I'm going to switch a whole bunch of your technology around because I can't use the technology you've asked for in this document. Well, that was smart rather than like taking a shot at it, right? Okay. But then it came back and said, hey, I'm going to build the initial prototype, but do you want me, it read the requirements and realized I didn't speak to some of these requirements. It says, hey, do you want me to implement that user authentication? Do you want to add filtering? Do you want to integrate local storage? Do you want to do like offline support? Like it just started asking me questions like, do you want these things included when I generate this stuff? I was like, All right, so it's acting sort of like a team member at this point in time. It's like, all right. So I clicked some boxes and I said approve and start. And it said, okay. And it generated the initial prototype and got to a checkpoint and actually is like checking in code and thinks about that kind of stuff. And it says that, hey, are you able to see this search form? And I did. So this is the search form that it generated for me. I didn't tell it what colors or, I didn't give it any of that direction. It just went, here you go. But all I asked it for was city and then check-in, check-out dates, like a date range. But it came up and went, oh, here's your food options. And it created all this by relevance and price level and cuisine type and minimum rating, hotels by price ratings. And, like I didn't ask it for any of that. It just generated it for me. Like, all right, moving along. So then it came out and it built more code. And then it came down here and said, hey, are these filtering? I said, they do not work. because it didn't. It just gave me a screen. And then down here I said, and I don't want all those filtering options on the main page. I only want the city and date, because that's what was in my requirements. And it's like, all right, what's it going to do? What are you going to do? And it was like, all right, so I understand your request. Excellent. Notice that I want to point out that it is in first person. I understand your request. Okay. It's important later. All right. All right, so then it changed the screen around, and then it ran and said, does it work? And I said, hey, I'm getting this error, the API key. I'm getting an error on the API key. And I know, as a developer, I never gave it my API key because I was waiting to see what would happen. Like, why am I going to solve the problem for the computer? The computer should ask me. Like, if this is real programming, like, let's do it. All right. So then it came and went, give me your key. Like, it was smart enough to know that what the problem was and then go, and if you just give me the key, I'll take care of it for you. So I gave it the key, and then I got an error. And it says, hey, error fetching. And then it looked into it, and then it changed some code, and then it said, can you test it? And I said, this is me. Nope, still getting errors, and I pasted the error in. All right, so I'm being nice at this point with this. All right. I said, it apologizes, which I really like. All right. Programmers don't apologize when they make mistakes. All right. So then it got to here, and so basically it was still giving me this error when it was trying to get to this data, and so it kept apologizing and kept correcting it, and you'll notice now that it took off the hotel stuff, but it left all the food options. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to let it go. It's a junior programmer. I'll come back to this. All right, let's just get it working. All right. So finally, it worked. And this is as you can see, this probably took 10 minutes to get to this point. All right. So now I was able to give it the location that I wanted and the dates that I was going to be there, and it started coming back with events and attractions and food options for San Jose, which I'll be at next week, and then. But it had this error, like it came back, and on this screen it said object. And I was like, that doesn't work. I said, great, that worked, but now for events, I'm getting this and not the information about the event. So it's just me having this conversation with this thing, right? And so it fixed it, so now I can actually see what was in there. It went, hey, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Oh, now it's not a singular I. If there's a problem, it turns into third-person mode. If it's doing well, it's in first-person mode. This is weird. Okay. So edit it. It worked. I was like, okay. I said, hey, can you check this into a GitHub repo for me? So it knew what I was talking about, right? So it actually checked it all in. So that way, so it took it off this cloud Replit server and actually stored the code in my own repo, so I can actually grab that code and move it wherever I wanted to. It's my code, right? And then it added hotels back. So I said, why did you add hotels back? Like, all I asked you to do was check it into GitHub. And I try to be pretty conversational with these tools just to see how they react, right? And it, of course, apologized for the confusion. And then said it would remove the hotels thing. And it was like, all right. And then it said, I removed the hotel functionality from the application, and I said, it ran it, and I said, no, the hotel's still there. And then it was like, oh, I apologize, I'm removing it now. Is it still there? And I said, the hotel information is still there, and I would give it a screenshot, like proving. So it's like, no, okay, now we're through. Like, it wants the hotel. Okay. Can you check to see if the application loads correctly without hotel functionality? All right. I said, this is me getting to my limit of patience. Since you can't seem to remove the hotel information, please fix it so it works. And I gave it the error again. And nope, still broken. I took a shot at it, right? All right. And can you check to see if it loads correctly without hotel? And I was like, did it just take away the hotel functionality because it couldn't figure out how to get the hotel functionality working? Because that is a very human thing if it actually did that. But no, it did not do that. So now I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to help it out. So this is where we start to get into like, what is a programmer going to do? So what I did is I went and I pulled the documentation for the API that it's supposed to be calling, and I gave it to it. I said, this is instructions on how to fix this error. since it couldn't figure it out on its own. All right, and it was like, all right, I'm updating it based on the correct parameters. Okay, good. And then it was like, okay, dude, I cranked that code for you, right? And it's like, I fixed it. Are you ready to share it with the world? Here's all the things I did. Ah, this is great. Nope, still error. That's still broken. Okay. I'm going to work at it again, and it went off into its own little world, and came back and went, okay, now it's fixed. In fact, here it is, updated the hotel search parameters. All right, we're good. Is it now working? No. Now there's no data showing on the screen. I'm not getting an error, but there's no data. And as any programmer would know at this point, crap. I'd rather get an error that says this is wrong than like not have it behave how I think it should behave. All right, so I'll investigate. Good, you do that. So I actually, I went out and I got the actual data that it did return to this tool. So I went out to Google and I was like, show me the last request that got made. Give me all the data from their last request to prove to this computer that it did give data back, right? I pasted that data in and I said, it's not displaying any data, but I can confirm that the API did return data. All right, so now I've stepped across the line. Normally I try to I will not help this thing and I will see how far it can get. But I was invested at this point because I thought it was close. All right, so let's go. All right. Can you search it now? No, it's not showing up. Can you search it now? No, it seems the API call is now not being made. So now just quit calling Google altogether. Oh my God. All right. So now it came back and said, no health information is showing and there's no call to the Google API. And then it says, I'll have our team investigate. I read that and I was like, oh, I see how this is going to go. It's not your fault it's not working. It's your team's fault it's not working. I pull that crap all the time. It's not going to work in this. Like, I know what's going on. All right. I can tell from the API in the console that the call was made, but Google was returning 900 results. And I was like, as a programmer, I'd be like, that's probably the problem. I was not expecting to come back with that much data. I said, can you just limit to the number to 20? And it was like, you've hit your usage limit. I got tired of dealing with me, right? It was like, I got to go on break. So it gave me a 4-hour timeout. Come back in 4 hours, and I'll keep struggling with you through your hotel problem. All right. But how much did that cost, right? So that was about 20 minutes worth of work that we got to that dead end. But now, what was nice is we saw proof of life. Like, it gave me data. Like, I saw the events and I saw the attract. It just wouldn't deal with the hotel thing for some reason. I don't know why. All right. But they're $15 a month. And then, which I actually pay for this. So this is one of the ones that I'm willing to actually put my own money. Transform Labs money. But some money is being spent on this particular tool because this is probably the one that's farthest along and is going to get us to where we want to go. All right, so that leads to the next question. So I get a number of questions every time I talk to somebody about AI. The first question is, well, non-technical people, can I just build my own product? Like, do I need programmers? Like, can I just go do this on my own? Can I install these tools and just do whatever I want to do? And so my normal question is an MVP good enough? Because I did no code validation. Even if I got that code working, it's not a production piece of code. It has no authentication. It's got no, it doesn't look good. There's all kinds of, I can't tell you how many times I've sat with a product owner who's like, the radius on that button is not 10. And I'm like, can someone fix the radius on this button because I'm not doing it? It's like we get to very minutia-oriented kind of changes to products. And so the question is, are you just trying to demonstrate a proof of concept? Are you just trying to get there? Show somebody this is the idea and it actually works? If the answer is yes, these are great tools for you. And yes, you can do that. And you don't need a programmer to do that as long as you're willing to be the guy in the blue box complaining at the computer as to what it's actually doing or not doing. But if you're willing to do that, yes, you can get there. The caveat is you must be willing to throw away that entire effort when you really want to build a product for real. You can get to something that works and it stores data and it looks good and it helps you think through the feature and it helps you think through the problem, and like you can get, and it's like, this is what I'm talking about, and everyone will be like, yeah, I get it. But if you really want to take that and put 1,000 users or 100,000 users on it, you're not going to use that code that this thing just generated. So that's the first thing you need to keep in mind as someone who's like, can I just go build it myself? Well, right now you're still going to need a programmer to build the thing, but can you go build your example instead of doing a slide deck in Figma? Probably. You can probably get there. All right. So let's talk about Devin. How many know who Devin is? 2, 3? Okay.
Walk with me down the path of Devin. So Devin, in March of 24, so last March, this company, Cognition, came out and said they cracked the nut. They have a completely 100% autonomous engineer that can do all the work for you. You're not going to do any of that back and forth stuff that you saw me do with the tool that was just released about 3 weeks ago. But they're done. Like it runs its own stuff. It can pull requests out of GitHub. You could just enter a ticket in a ticketing system and it'll go, oh, I know what you're trying to do. And it'll write that code and be done. Check it all back in. It all works. It's flawless. They released some statistics. And so this is something called the SWE bench. And this is, I'm going to tell you what that is in a second, but just flow with the numbers for a second. Just sit with these numbers. So Devin was at 13.86% on this scoring mechanism. Everybody else is at 4%. This seems like, holy crap, they've got something. Like, this is a real thing. Like, we should pay attention to it. So the SWE bench is, just for those that are curious in the audience, they took about 2,300 problems that they've had humans solve. They checked them in, and then they asked different models to try to solve those problems. So these models just grind at these about 3,000 functional problems. And it has to edit the code base, it has to check things in, it has to do the work, it has to figure out if the work is right, and then it has to check that code back in, right? And it just iterates over it. So if we look at this number, that means out of those 3,000, it correctly did 14%. Humans, the average human programmer on the SWE workbench is about 90-ish kind of percent. We don't know everything. Some of them are I don't even know what you're asking. So that's what this is a measure of. So that 14% is a measure of, out of about 3,000 problems, it was able to solve 14% of those problems. All right. A month after they announced a $21 million Series A round, so they got $21 million, they produced this video of this magical tool doing magical work in a magical land. They picked up $175 million in funding because that thing was it. That was going to solve the problem. Programmers, go home. We got Devin. Right? Turns out, as anyone can believe, they lied. That was not true. It didn't actually work. So it was a great video, it was good marketing, but it didn't actually do what it was supposed to do. They're still working on it. You still can't you can go to Google Devin AI, and you can sign up for access, and they'll tell you when you're allowed to have access, but they're still chunking away. So it wasn't quite as done as they had. But this is a number I want you to think about, this 13.86%. That was the thing that got them $175 million in March of this year. The current bench is 43%. The tools I use pretty regularly, Aider, is at 26.33%. So they took $175 million at 14% completion, and now, just 7 months later, we're already at 43%. So if we start thinking about that progression, right? So I'm going to stop there for a second with numbers, so you don't burn out. But the next question I get asked a lot from junior developers is, what if I'm just starting out? What if I'm just learning how to program? Like a couple months ago, well, a couple of years ago, we would tell you, go to a boot camp. Get the fundamentals of programming, get into the workforce, you're gonna make a lot of money, like this is the solution for you. For those of you that don't know, that sort of progression that developers go through is, I become a junior programmer, I spend about 3 years doing project kind of stuff, and that's 3 years doing diverse projects, because as everyone knows, if I spend 5 years doing the same thing, I've got 1 year of experience 5 times. So junior programmers, we want to see a progression over about a 3-year period of multiple types of projects and multiple kinds of things that you're working on. Then after about 3 years, and there's no magic number, but 3 years-ish, you become a mid-level developer. After about 6-7 years, you become what we consider a senior developer. After about 3 more years, you become what we consider as an architect. Okay. So if you're just starting out, you're at the very beginning of that journey. I can't believe I said that word. I hate that word. Okay. You're at the beginning of your career, and you're going, what should I do? Like, what should I learn? What's the tools, right? So this was done in last summer in 23. This is for technology, who's using AI and what's on a daily basis, like really on a daily basis. And this is a year old. And I would guess underneath a lot of these numbers is Copilot, because people will consider Copilot AI. It's like, well, technically it is, if AI is math, right? Copilot is math, right? But you can see that the web designers, back-end developers, full stack developers are probably just talking to GPT or Copilot. Okay. So if you were a junior developer just starting out, I would say you should be using those tools I had on that new tool slide. Skip over, it's hard. You should understand the tools on the current tool slide, but you should spend your time on the tools of the new tool slide. And the reason why you should do that is because if you think about what happened, that demo, both those demos you saw, those are within 20 minutes of work. We were pretty reasonably down the path of something. And I did some back of the napkin calculations, and what I've realized is those tools allow me to change my unit of measure of estimates. So if I would say something's going to take me a day, the new tools allow me to do it in about an hour. If I say it's about a week, it's about a day. If I say it's about a month, it's about a week. So now when I'm doing estimates and I'm talking to a team, I'm asking them, how much of these new tools are you using? If they say they're not, then I know that you are a unit of measure off as to what your real trajectory and speed could be to solve these problems. So when we talk to developers now, and I've canvassed a lot of senior developers, I'm like, are you using any of these? And a lot of them don't even know what these tools are. They've never seen them before. And now the reason for that is they're a month old, some of them. So if you've got a daily grind where you're actually writing code on a daily basis, how much are you actually paying attention to about what's actually going on around you? Maybe not a lot. That's actually my job. That's what I get to do. I watch YouTube for a living. I joke with people. Right? But I will tell you, the number that a junior programmer should look at right now is this number. Because this number is what's increasing and what's going on. Because if you extrapolate that number, what that really means is we're going to be around 100% on these scoring mechanisms, which is probably a little bit better than humans, right around the humans' capability, by December of 25. Fortunately for this talk, that's in 20 months. So my prediction only has to go 18 months, because I was very clear with all of you about I'm only predicting 18 months, okay? But we can now sort of see that in about 20 months, these tools are going to be as good as the average developer, which is, that's what you really want to think about. So when someone talks to me about like, oh, when do we not need programmers? You're always going to need a programmer because just like you always need project managers and testers, and like all of their tools are getting better too. But when is a programmer not doing what programmers do now? Probably by December of 25 is when programmers' lives will actually be different. Now, does that mean we need less programmers? Probably not. And now we're into the, okay, what's the next? Do we need less programmers? Probably not, because when was the last time the business you work with ever went, that's good enough. I don't think our clients need more. I don't think we need to expand into another territory. I don't think we need to create more revenue. I don't think we need to be better. It never happens, right? So just because our tools are getting better and allows us to do more work quicker, that doesn't mean the work is going to go away. And it still needs someone, like when I had to go look that API up and then give it the API and then go find out was data actually being pulled and then give it the data, like that is what programmers are going to do for a living in the future. Because the average user is not going to do that kind of like detailed work. So there's still mental thinking. So it all gets better. Our tools as programmers get a lot better. Like I don't have to do a lot of grunt work, and I can sort of, I actually working with some of these tools now, it's a lot like I'm talking to a junior developer. And I'm pair programming with a junior developer. I don't touch the keyboard. I tell them what they should be doing. I sort of have them think about the problem that they're trying to solve, and then I see if they're actually going to solve it correctly. I may guide them in like, have you thought of this kind of thing? But these tools are now coachable. They're to the point that they're beyond just a co-pilot. They're now coachable. That's going to get better. What's going to get worse is the dissatisfaction with people who are building the products and MVPs using these tools, realizing at some point in time we're going to throw it all away and start over. That's where it's going to get worse. There's going to be like someone's going to get upset. Like, I spent it works. Well, I'm showing it to you on the screen. Why can't you just like make it better? It's like because the underlying reasoning by what it did wasn't good enough. Because it didn't think about the architecture. It didn't think about those things on that slide that it doesn't have the capability to think about because it's a language model. So that is the end of the Unleashing AI as the Future of Programming. And this is where we sort of talk through the, is that going to create this like this utopia where like as a programmer I get to go sit on a beach and like I'm done and like money rolls in for some reason? Or is it a dystopian hellscape where every programmer is unemployed and suddenly we're out, I don't know, becoming, as most programmers for some reason get fascinated about, we all become blacksmiths. I don't know what to do with that. It's true. So I asked GPT for a picture, like I always do on these talks, about hey, I need to describe it as sort of this utopian, perfect environment for programmers, and yet it's still this dystopian hellscape. And always take the first thing that comes back with, which this. Which apparently every human on the planet is a programmer. Which, if you think about it, I mean, if you can have a conversation with it and it writes the code for you and it works to an acceptable level, isn't that what really is going to end up happening? So that is the end of the future of programming. Did take an hour. I'm sorry we started late. I was trying to make it shorter, so I skipped over some stuff. But let's go in there. If you're interested in these kind of talks, we do a meetup once a month at meetup.com, Columbus AI. You can come to this meetup, and there's like-minded individuals. We talk about beyond just, it's not all about code. We talk about the business. We talk about sort of the environment, sort of the social impact of AI, those kind of things. It's a lot of fun. There's typically food. There might be adult beverages. But you should all come to that if you're interested in this kind of thing at all. And I'm Slee from Transform Labs. Now we can take questions.